Welcome to IGCSE Sociology Specimen Paper Guide series. In this series, we are talking about both of the sociology paper that are going to start in 2025. So we are on paper number 1, question number 1, source A. We already have attempted. You see the link in the description box and I will attach the link on the top of your screen so you can get the access of source A, paper number 1. Now move on to part B, and part B is saying that identify two types of question used by the sociologist. Again, as I mentioned, that you will get one marks for each correct answer. So for that question, part B, you might talk about open-ended questions and close-ended question. Open-ended questions and close-ended question. Right. So you will get 1 marks for that question and 1 marks for that identification. Now move on to part C. Part C is saying that explain one strength and one limitation of the official statistics. Right. Now marking scheme guide is same. I am just going to explain it again. 1 mark you will get for identification and 1 mark you will get to explain your identification, as they are saying for two things, one strength and one limitation. So for stage number 1 you would be able to get 2 marks and rest process will remain same for the next identification that will be related to the limitation. So this is how you can get 4 out of 4 marks. Now move on to the question and let's see that what things we have. Explain one strength and one limitation of the official statistics. So one strength that we have, official statistics provide a large scale of the quantitative data. So you might talk about provide quantitative data. So what things you can write it over here, that official statistics provide a large quantitative data. This makes them useful for identifying trends, and comparison over time. Now you can see that for that identification you will be able to get 1 marks, and to explain them in a 1.5 line you will be able to get 1 marks. Now move on to the limitation that you can write. You can say that that could be politically biased. So governments might present the data in a way that favors their policies. Right. So government might present data that favors their policies, making data less valid. Right. So again, for this identification you will be able to get 1 marks, and to explain this identification you would be able to again get 1 marks. So this is how you can get 4 out of 4 marks in our section C. Now move on to part D, and part D is saying that evaluate the interpretivist approach to sociological research. Your answer should include at least 2 arguments for the approach and 2 arguments against the approach, and then you have to draw a conclusion. Right. So for 10 marks question, I'm just going to talk about level 3 of your marking scheme. Level 3 marking scheme saying that you would be able to get 8 or 10 marks strong sociological knowledge, and then use the sociological terms. And concepts. right? And third thing that you can use over here, to develop points for both sides. To develop points for both sides. Both sides mean that you have to talk about in the favor and providing opposing argument. Right? So for both of these things, like favoring and opposing the argument, at least there must be two developed points. And one additional thing that you can write it over here, there must be a well structured conclusion. Well structured conclusion, or you can say with a proper judgment. With proper judgment. Now let's try to attempt this question and see that what things we can write it over here. Now you have to start from giving proper introduction. Although I am providing the headings, but no need to provide the headings in the paper. So you will start from introduction. Introduction. So what things you can write it over here? You need to first explain the terms that have been used in the question. So the terms that have been used in our question is interpretivist approach. So what is interpretivist approach? Start from that terms. So interpretivist emphasize qualitative research to understand the social meaning, unlike positivist who prefer the scientific methods, interpretivists argue that sociology should explore human interaction in depth. So that was the introduction. Now move on to the arguments for the interpretivist approach. Right. So arguments for interpretivist approach. Now, what things that you can write it over here? Understand the social meaning. Here you can talk about the word seen. You already, I just hope that you guys all know that what is this term basically mean. Here you can talk about that interpretivist belief society cannot be studied like the natural sciences because human behavior is based on meaning and interpretations. So this is something that you can write, and then to generalize it more, you might provide some examples. Right. Now, I just want to compare it with our marking scheme. You can see that first term was the strong sociological knowledge. Now you can see that what we did in the introduction part, we make the comparison between the terminologies. That positive is saying that, interpretive is saying that. This shows that you know better. This shows the positive picture of your information regarding the sociology, and then use the sociological terms. You can see we are using interpretivist, then we use the positivist, and then we used these terminologies. You can see over here Woodstein, right? And we will use more of the terms in our coming questions. And then you must have to provide two develop points. And then the third one was to develop points for both sides. So for that side, what we did, we provide this Woodstein, a well-known developed point. This is our argument number one. So example that you can give, that in-depth interviews that helps understand the personal experiences, for example, the mental health relationships. So this is what interpretivists are talking about, that we need to collect the data, or we need to know the social meaning through human interactions, right? And then the next thing that we can write it over here, that could be high validity. High validity. For the high validity, what you can write it over here, you can write about methods like participant observation. Again, you can see that I am using proper terms. Participant observation. In fact, validity itself a very well known terminology in the research methods. So methods like participant observation provide rich, detailed understanding of the pupil actions, unlike the quantitative data. Now you can see, again I am making a comparison. So unlike the quantitative data, the qualitative method explore why people behave in a certain way, and that particular answer we cannot get from the quantitative data. So this is something you have to provide it over here in the favor of interpretivist approach. Now move on to some argument which will oppose the interpretivist arguments. So you might say opposing or argument against this view. Oppose the interpretivist approach. Interpretivist approach. So what things we can write it over here? Lack of reliability. So the point that you can write is lack of reliability. So finding from small samples, for example, case studies cannot be replicated. This is number one. You can additionally, you can provide the example to make this understanding even more better. So what you can talk about it, you can say two researchers might interpret the same interview differently. So again, we have the lack of reliability, and then the lack of representativeness and generalizability. Lack of representativeness and generalizability. So positivists argue that large scale surveys, now you can see I am talking from the positivist perspective. So what you can write it over here, the positive argue that large scale surveys are more scientific. For example, a study using 10 in-depth interviews may not represent the whole population. Absolutely right. Now, based on these two arguments, we have to draw a conclusion. And how to draw the conclusion? You can write it over here. Conclusion. For the conclusion, what you will write it, you have to provide the balanced view. You would say that while interpretivist methods are great for the understanding the social meaning, but they lack the scientific rigor. Rigor means the intensity, the hard work, the hardship. It required more rigor. And then a combined approach. You can see that we have the balance. We said yes, that interpretivist methods are great, but it required, or it having the lackness in the scientific rigorness. So now I am going to conclude it in a proper way. So what I am saying, that a combined approach mean we need to collect data both quantitatively and qualitatively. So you can say this term combined approach, what we said is a triangulation. Triangulation. So using both qualitative and the quantitative method ensure the comprehensive understanding. Right. So this is something you have to talk about it. Remember things for that 10 marks question. Try to attempt it in somewhere between 12 to 15 minutes. Right. So this is how you have to attempt this particular part B, C, and D. If you find any problem, just comment below. I will respond to you accordingly.